emotional. It's really sweet. I will change that. And before she was born, I launched Groundswell. Hey, Wendy. And Groundswell became a kind of like virtual ad agency before there was virtual, because this was the 80s, late 80s, for human rights and environment non-profits. And then we moved back into private sector because I had school fees to pay, because we had lots more kids, and now they're having kids. And so I've launched Groundswell on the birth of my first child, and I closed Groundswell and launched new stuff on the birth of her first child, which is now 18 months ago. That's what caused Wendy to christen me name me the grandfather of sustainability. Narisha's moved it on now today. It's also what grand dude of something or other. And so that takes the form of top-down consulting for-profit stuff with corporates and governments and supra-governmental bodies, which is more or less what Groundswell was doing, but with a difference, and a bottom-up non-profit called LOCA, which is based on local, low-carbon, and loca, the Spanish for crazy lady, because my mama and my grandma and my great-grandma trained me not to waste anything, and that's what it's all about. It's local economies, made up of locally empowered people who are providing each other, their own and each other's needs in food, fashion, furniture, finance. I'm trying to make it all begin with F, but it also includes housing, and mainly all the main staff of life requirements provided by and for each other within local economies, but networked into a global network, and that's LOCA. So that's what I'm up to now. Was that an overlong answer? Sorry.
No, not at all. I think it's important, obviously, for people to hear it from your own perspective. So the reason that I actually wanted you here today was also for you to be able to talk about this recent piece that you published around community climate clubs and how they're a low-cost, high-impact action opportunity. So for the benefit of the audience who probably haven't read that article, would you be able to just summarize for them what you mean within that?
Sure. So that is primarily the domain of LOCA, as opposed to Transform ESG, which is the top-down consulting thing. But actually, when large global organizations, be they public, private, third, or academic sector, get involved, then we will and are beginning to involve Transform ESG as well. We want to transform ESG so it becomes a genuine force for good, rather than a bunch of greenwashing and smelly sock washing, the social version of greenwashing, in my language. Community climate clubs, based on what we've been doing pro bono for, again, over 30 years, in fact, rather longer than I've been consulting. So over 30 years ago, I and a bunch of other crazy hippies started a thing called Bath Permaculture Trust. And it was basically, how do we make Bath, the city of Bath, our home city, which is a tiny city. It's only called a city because it has an abbey, not because it's very large. It's now 100,000. It was then about 85,000 population. How do we make it more sustainable, socially, environmentally, and everything? And permaculture is based on the idea of people care, planet care, and fair share. And so that's what we were trying to do. And each of the founding trustees took on a task, and I'll explain why this is what created community climate clubs in the much more recent past in a moment. But each of the founding trustees took on one or two projects, which that person then led. And my projects were a permaculture design course, and the first farmers market since World War I. And the permaculture design course was very well attended. I mean, I was an ad agency on legs. I used all the skills I'd been taught, by the great Juliet Williams, who showed me how to sell a hell of a lot of BMWs for my clients, our clients, and NatWest pension plans, and sugared cereals and platform-style shoes, to sell bums on seats tickets to the permaculture design course. That was great. We oversold massively and had to book another venue and another course because people are like, whoa, hippies don't do this. I'm like, well, this one does. But the farmers market took much longer. It was 3 years planning, working with an amazing warrior woman by the name of Pat Tutt, a Canadian lady who was then the head of the what was called the Local Agenda 21 initiative within the local Bath City Council. 3 years down the road, mainly by virtue of her and her team's amazing work and me just doing this, hey, got an idea. I'll make a lot of noise, get a lot of people listening because they can't help but listen because I'm loud. And let's do this farmers market. And we did. And then the BBC got wind of it because it was a massive success. We sold everything. After 3 years of planning, we got all the farmers we could within 30 miles. 2 rules, 30-mile max, 30-mile radius, no middle people. We sold everything farmers within 30 miles could produce during that, in that 3-year planning and growing and rearing livestock period in 1 hour. And the BBC, I cried. I was so excited and so happy. And the BBC got wind of it. They filmed me and Carrie, my wife, and our then little toddlers haggling for muddy carrots with the farmers and talking about what we were doing here with this farmers market thing. And 530 something more farmers markets sprung up because of the documentary they made based on that interview. And the BBC Radio 4 food program got in touch and said, hey, you've started a national movement. And I'm like, no, you guys at the BBC started the movement. We started one market, but I'll take the kudos, thank you. I've been, I keep getting these weird titles. You guys are responsible for more than most. I became known as the founder of the UK Farmers Markets movement, but it wasn't me. It was Pat and her team and a whole bunch of farmers and a whole bunch of amazing people who made stuff happen. And so now we're moving into community climate clubs to focus not only on food, as I say, but also fashion, upcycling, repurposing. Depop's the future. But I think it needs to be local and then a network of local depoppers, talking to each other. I got a friend who's turning vintage saris into COVID masks, but they're coming from India and they're gorgeous, but she's in Bristol. And I think, maybe in India we could use, for all her brilliance as a designer of masks and jewelry and other things, she's part of this whole Loca thing, total genius. Shout out Felicity Levy-Bull in Bristol. Felicity B, you can find her online. She does this. But yeah, if we can be doing that with aprons from Somerset, and in India, we could be doing vintage silk saris into masks for people that are right there on the spot, local people. And likewise, as I say, with the furniture, likewise. And we're also training people. We have a deal brewing with a UK college who are doing apprenticeship programs for the UK, funded by the UK government, and they want to go sustainable with that. They want to get vocational training programs which are focused on minimizing waste, maximizing the local economy boosting. It's in Wales, and they've got legislation in Wales that's unique in the world, aimed at the maintaining and building the well-being of future generations. So they're ahead of the game, ahead of nearly all parts of the world in this. And so they were discussing working with them on training people to upcycle, repurpose, recycle, make money, be it from food or from furniture or from fashion or from finance or any of these things. Housing, as I say, fitting solar panels to local homes so that you can make money doing that and cut carbon doing that and not have to worry about having to deal crack to do that instead, and getting into trouble, because that's how I started, as you know. And when I got a break from some fantastic people back in the day who put me back on the straight and narrow, it gave me some idea of how we might make things a little bit better, and now I'm trying to give back.
No, and I think that's fantastic, especially because for a lot of people in the audience, sometimes the accessibility of some kind of action is always challenging, right? Like, where do they start? And so I think you amplifying the message of it being local makes so much more sense, because people often don't realize that by localizing things within your community, actually that's the biggest impact you can have on climate change. I think as a society, this, Rob, we've become too addicted to things coming from all over the world, as opposed to, like how you articulated it, why can't those silk saris be for those people in India versus what we have here? And so I think that requires quite a bit of change in thinking. So one question I'd like to ask, and then I want to hand over to Wendy for some of her questions, but just a quick one was, When you went about doing that farmers market piece as kind of the first entry point, what were some of the, I mean, did you come across any challenges from like people who you were trying to rally around you? Were they kind of dismissive or really on board with the idea?
Great question, because actually it's really important to understand that it's not, there's a one of the problems I face in myself every day. And funnily enough, I was back to Asia, funnily enough. It keeps happening. I don't know, maybe that's because you're here and, I sense it in you, because you have the lineage, you have the DNA, you have the, somehow I resonate with that a lot. I was taught by a different part of Asia by the Dzogchen Buddhists of Tibet, how to stop being dualistic in my thinking. And one of the things I used to do a lot before I got that training was, judge right, wrong, good, bad, better, worse, male, female, old, young. And I have realized that it's not about that. So the reason I mentioned that I got you really freaked out when I said all that stuff, didn't I? She's like, oh, he's going to say something racially complicated. Oh dear, he's an old white guy. He'll probably just make a fool of us all. But actually what happened was the training that the Dzogchen Buddhists of Tibet gave me in this post-dualist thinking way. It was an education in the state, in the nature of mind, as they put it. Showed me that, it's wrong for me to judge Sainsbury's for doing global food systems. What about talking about teaming up with them? So people would be like, you're Mr. Farmer's Market, you must hate the supermarkets. And I'm like, no, my old school friend, David Tyler, is the chairman, and he's the kindest man, one of the kindest people I've ever met. And I didn't parlay that old school Thai thing into this project because I didn't need to. I spoke to the local Sainsbury's people and said, can we put the first farmers market in the UK in your car park? Because you've got a beautiful old 19th century railway station that you restored as part of your planning application to build the supermarket. This is way back in the 1980s, this stage, the 90s when we did the farmers market. And they were like, why would we put competitors in our car park, Rob? And I'm like, okay, because the people who shop for some local Bath cheese and some local Bath apple juice will then buy their, nappies and razors and microwaves in your supermarket and not your competitors' supermarkets. Yeah. And they were like, yeah, good call. Okay, you're on. And it's still in that Sainsbury's supermarket, beautiful setting, glass. It's like Paddington Station, but without the trains and the tracks. And it's the farmers market every Saturday now. Still is, decades later. So there was a challenge with, should we just alienate and villainize and victimize the supermarkets? No, let's work with them. And we did, and it's been fantastic. They love us, we love them. Likewise, let's assume that bringing tomatoes in 37 rusty transit vans from within 30 miles is the best thing to do. I did a lot of research and postgrad dissertation on local versus global food systems. And it's actually more sustainable to bring a shipping container full of tomatoes from Chile than it is to get 37 rusty transits on the road, burning fossil fuel and driving 23 miles average within the 30-mile radius to sell their tomatoes at the farm. That isn't to say that we let Chilean tomatoes in, because it's 30-mile max and that's the rule. And there's other reasons why it's great that we should have them from within 30 miles. But let's not make judgments, let's not assume that international systems are bad and local systems are good. You need both. Just as you need the top down and the bottom up, you need the global and local. And if you can get these local economies going and then network them all together, you've got a global system of local systems, and that's actually what we, I think, really need. So if the people in Chile can grow better tomatoes because they talk to the people in Somerset, fantastic, but let's keep Chilean tomatoes in Chile and Somerset tomatoes in Somerset and just use, recycled chip fat powered vans to deliver them rather than rusty old fossil fuel burning transits, which is what we do. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think that just exemplifies how much more we have to think about things in systems rather than just concepts, because we have to look at where they operate and how they operate. Like, for example, maybe you don't need to use the chip vans, you can use electric vehicles, and then that changes the complete even cost model of how much that tomato costs. Yeah. So it's kind of also thinking about where cities are going and all that sort of stuff. But I'm going to hand over to Wendy because I know she's got quite a few questions as well.
Cool.
Thanks, Nim.
Nice to see you, Namisha. And you, Wendy?
So yeah, lovely to see you as always, Rob. It's always a pleasure. So yeah, I think like one of the things that I was most excited about today is like, I feel like this kind of concept of the community climate club is something that either our attendees can go away and find a local club in their area to support, or alternatively, if there isn't one, maybe it's something that they can create. And I think this is, for me, it's quite exciting because I know that we've got a lot of people here from universities. So I feel that this is potentially a concept that could be adopted in as part of the student union programming for students to create their own community climate club. So I would like to lean on you for a little bit of learning here and just ask you, what learnings or advice can you pass on to the audience about setting up and creating a community club like this?
Okay. I mean, so many chords struck, as always, by you two. So I, after we did what was going to become the inspiration, Bath Permaculture Trust, for what you could call the first community climate club, and it worked in all the other areas too, as I've said, finance and furniture and fashion and all these things. I actually did a postgrad program, as I said, in local versus global. And versus is not even a word I like, local and global food systems. They're not in adversarial relationship at all, as I said. And doing postgrad research, I did participatory action research and cooperative inquiry in this field. I was able to, being action research, it required that I do an active program out in the world. And I actually was criticized quite rightly by I lecture also, or was then lecturing at Bath University, and I lecture at other universities sometimes. Always pro bono, so they don't nick my intellectual property. You know what they're like, terrible. Sorry, did I say that out loud? Oh well. I distracted myself by consulting academia again.
Reel you back in.
I know, I went off on one again.
Yeah.
Grandpa. Got 2 more grandchildren, twin boys, month old. So Rupert and, you want to watch these guys, Rupert and Joey, they're going to change everything. They are already changing my life. So the interesting thing was my fellow lecturer, the amazing Barış Yalabik, Turkish guy, he and I used to lecture on sustainability in business at Bath University School of Management. And he said to me, Rob, the thing is, you've got this farmers market deal going on, but you got it backwards. The reason I say that, with all respect, said he, is, and he even paid for lunch, if I recall. He said, in Turkey, the farmers were predominantly agricultural. You'll see why I'm saying this as a part of a sort of university-focused thing in a moment, I promise. He said in Turkey, the farmers in our still predominantly agricultural economy sell what they can to the supermarkets, but that's a relatively small proportion of the output. And then the rest goes into the farmers markets at way down below the supermarket prices, and proper people, real people who aren't farmers and don't grow their own food, can buy food at reduced prices. Those who are less well off buy food at the farmers market because it's cheaper. Whereas in your farmers markets, it's yummy mummies and daddies in Bath who are all on 6- and 7-figure incomes, buying overpriced, expensive, seeded wholemeal sourdough loaves made by one of your companies, Thoughtful Bakery, plug, where they also go to learn to bake their own sourdough bread and pay a fortune for you to teach them. Well, not me, but my guys down at the bakery. And it's perpetuating and even exacerbating the haves and have-nots problem. You need to make it more the people's farmers market thing. And I'm like, yeah, he's damn right. So let's start doing that, and hence Loca. But the research I did needed a project. So we started an apprenticeship program in one of the worst hit youth crime areas of the UK, which happened to be a rural community south of Bath, where the mechanization and globalization of the food industry had basically taken away a lot of the training and employment from those communities. And there was a lot of poverty trap, and the kids coming out of school couldn't get training and employment and wages and all that stuff. So they ended up inevitably on benefits. They ended up inevitably, like me, becoming criminals, like me back in the day when I was 10, first arrest, as you know. Quite proud of that. Didn't get arrested again for 9 years. They never caught me till I was 19. It's the second time. Smashing stuff up. So we got £250,000 off the European Social Fund, and we turned it into an apprenticeship in agriculture. And some of those kids are now smallholders in their own right, with their own farms, and providing the farmers markets with great produce, making great money, housing, clothing, and educating their kids really successfully, prospering. And one or two, didn't join the program and died of overdoses because they stayed with the crack dealing thing and the crack consuming thing because they were stuck in a poverty trap. So that's how the university research in my postgrad program turned into a sort of, reconciliation of the haves and the have-nots. The social as well as the ecological benefits began to accrue because we demonstrated the efficacy of a training program. And here we are with a UK college about to go into a new training program in all the sectors, not just food, but all the other ones I've mentioned as well. Okay, so does that answer your question or not?
Kind of.
Ask me a better one. Sorry, forgive me.
Okay,
so I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking about in terms of if we're talking about this in terms of like a local ecosystem where we've got people that are repairing things, whether that be household items or clothing items, and you've got somebody else then that could potentially offer childcare, and so you're creating that interconnected ecosystem of resilience and support within a small community. Like, I'm guessing what I'm asking is taking it right back to basics. Like, what's the first step? Is it about identifying people in the community that can do those things and bringing them together, or is it more of a build it and they will come? And just how can, and I guess this leads me on to my next question as well, is just like, what are the key considerations and must-dos when you're building a community from the very beginning?
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was probably misreading the question a little bit there. But I like a ramble and I like a digression too. I'm a river. I have a lot of tributaries. So one of the most important things I think in that, and we've seen this in urban poverty programs we've also worked on actually, sustainability and poverty, again, mainly in the food sector, but it's now spreading to other sectors. Urban and rural, intergenerational. When we were doing that stuff in the in south of Bath, in the rural community poverty program funded by the European Social Fund and the local strategic partnership of public sector and local authorities, it was when the grandpas and grandmas came along and said, look, we know how to get food out of the ground. We've been doing it for many years, generations, and we learned from our grandparents how to do that because there wasn't global logistics and international food companies and so on in those days. So we can teach our grandchildren how to do that. And the grandmas, there was quite a gender split, and it makes sense in many ways. Guys generally have more muscle mass, and they'll double dig an allotment more quickly and less painfully than the grandmas. The grandmas then are like, okay, get the mud off your boots, get those carrots cleaned up. We're going to make some carrot chutney. And I learned that from my great grandma, and I'm going to teach my great granddaughters and great grandsons how to do that, because a bunch of carrots is like $2.99 at the farmer's market. 3 jars of carrot chutney at $3.99 a pop is like 12 quid. So, hey, we'd be mad not to use our old preserving and other techniques we've learned from the ancestors and passing it on to our successors. So that's how a community, rebuilding those intergenerational relationships and the learning that may be lost if we don't do this is a vital part of that. Whether you're starting this whole thing from scratch or just trying to kind of reboot or upgrade an existing system of fragments where it still exists, but the parts haven't been, let's say, rejoined and reconnected to make a living community organism. My previous book's called Organismics, and that's what I rabbit on about. A community is an organism, a company is an organism, a family is an organism, and if you don't have the heart and the lungs and the liver and the spleen feeding and fed by each other, whether that be in a community version, the generations or the rich people and the poor people or the tailors and the bakers or whatever, then the thing doesn't have a cohesive system in which the parts feed and are fed by each other like any living organism, like you or me. You know, if my heart goes down, I go down, they all go down. So it's in the interest of the lungs to look out for the heart and the kidneys to look out for the lungs, and it's the same in an organism.
So I guess what you're saying is it's really about ensuring, and this kind of actually leads me very nicely onto my next point, which is like what you're saying is it needs to be inclusive at all levels. Yep. So, and I just wonder, like, you know, from I know that obviously you're from Bath. Bath has actually is predominantly a sort of white community there. There's not so many, you know, different nationalities and things, you know, in Bath itself. So how do you ensure, especially in an existing community like that, that this is inclusive, you know, to everybody in the community, and it's not felt like it's this kind of, like you say, yummy mummy, you know, people that those sort of people that want to get involved, that maybe have a big amount of spare time because they don't have to go to work and hubby goes off to do the work for them. How do you make these communities more inclusive?
Great question, because of course you've raised we've talked a bit about the gender thing, both the sort of old school way of doing gender, and again, it's not right or wrong, it's the thing. You know, you can learn from what there is and what you want and make the transition. My new book's called Algorithmics, and it's about that, you know, with an RHYTHM. I'm not going to pick up my djembe, but, you know, it's about bringing humans back into rhythm with the rest of nature. I do it by drumming and dancing, as well as this stuff, food and fashion, furniture and funding. But interestingly, at Bath, they recently opened a fabulous supermarket run by a brilliant Egyptian guy. And I always say shukran when I buy food from him, because that's his language. And my mama taught me to say please and thank you. And I decided to start learning how to do that in the language of every person I possibly can. And he responds he loves that. It's like, you know, you can sort of see me and understand my uniqueness. And he's got literally like 90 different nationalities foods in his store. And I love to buy the tahini that is made by the Lebanese, and I love to buy, you know, the incredible Darjeeling tea that comes from the Indian people there, whose products are there. And they have just so many nationalities of people working there. And Bath, although it has been very white, very male dominated, very old school, you know, the pasty, rich white power structures are nowhere more evident still, as you say, than in Bath. It's amazing, actually. People like him are bringing it around, and people are like, wow, you know, my 87-year-old in-laws are learning that actually you can have these amazing dishes made with not dairy products, but with tahini, for instance, that I get from that store nearby. And it tastes, if anything, even better. And you get their grandchildren, my children, and their children too, coming in and saying, well, we're vegans, so we'd love to eat that. We're not coming for lunch if you're serving me something that's made of cream, Grandpat, that's the name I call my father-in-law, and Granny, because we're vegans and we don't want that stuff. But, you know, while we're talking about this, you know, the tahini is so delicious. Do you know how that's made? It's made from, you know, sesame seeds in the Lebanon, or where it's made in several places. And they're like, really? And I'm not kidding you, their racism is beginning, because they're old school, you know, they come from the 1930s and they don't know any different. Their racism is being quietly waggled.
Dissipated. Yeah.
See what I mean? And so and you walk down any street, even in Bath now, and there's that, I mean, that store's got, as I say, dozens and dozens and dozens of nationalities, but there's a Turkish halal store next door. And there's an amazing Italian handmade fresh pasta store next door to that one. And there's an amazing, you know, it could be, and there's just every single kind of thing, because it's becoming, weirdly, the haves rather like this kind of groovy, trendy, you know, one of my kids nicked my pension to buy a place in Hackney. I've never seen so many nationalities in one street in my life. It's really cool for the even the pasty white, privileged, privately educated we're talking about me here, aren't we? People to take 27 nationalities and turn it into a 4-course lunch, you know.
Yeah.
It's cool to do
and
that.
I think that's one of the really exciting concepts of the community club for me, because if you can engage those people from different nationalities and, you know, who all have different skill sets, you know, as individuals, and, you know, I think when you start talking about cuisine and fashions, you know, different nationalities, you know, have very much different tastes or can bring something really diverse into the group. And I actually think that it's a great way of breaking down some of those boundaries amongst communities, you know, for people to start getting to know each other, their neighbours a little bit better, a bit like they used to, really. So yeah, I really like this concept, and I think it's something that a lot of us can take away with either go and, you know, join these local community clubs if they're in our area, or consider, as I said, you know, potentially setting one up yourself. And I think some of the universities, there would be great test beds for this. So if anyone's listening and you want to have a go at doing this, then please do so, and we'll signpost some resources afterwards. But Rob, I also wanted to touch on, you know, we've spoken a little bit about gender, and you, as you say, from an old-fashioned concept, so to speak. But what I found really interesting about some of the conversations that we've had is your time that you spent in South America. And kind of and actually like a little bit of the educational piece around there, around this way that gender is constructed now, and gender equality is not what it was for a lot of communities a long time ago. And I wonder if you could just tell the audience a little bit about that.
You're thinking about like the Longhouse and the Roundhouse and the indigenous wisdom keepers.
Indeed.
Yeah, well, actually, again, great question, because as I say, I don't want to say, you know, it's not about trying to make everybody the same. It's about understanding, you know, there's a piece in the organism. And again, by the way, I said, I think last time we did one of these gigs, you know, when I talk about my book, Organismics, I'm not trying to plug it for sale. It's free to anybody who wants it. I'll send you, anybody wants it, tell me and I'll send them a PDF. If they're really bad, I'll send them a hardback, you know, but they'd have to come and see me for that and fetch it, because there'd be a reason. They probably need to be employed, or not employed, but join one of our organizations. The non-profit, by the way, LOCAT is employee owned, but they're not even employees. It's just a democracy of people winning and delivering and charging for great work, and then sharing out the financial proceeds on the basis of voting as to who gets what, who did what, who gets what, and who needs most, you know, today, this week. So yeah, okay. So Grandpa Simon Huarte was the first he was a full-blood Chumash tribe, Southern Californian. So on the brink of, you know, right between South and North America. He was the first full-blood Native American wisdom keeper and elder that I worked with, and he was always very clear. You know, the funnily enough, it's like the opposite of the white folks. The land belongs to the women, actually. So I don't want to go sexist the other way, but, you know, it's important that distinctions are made. The heart and the lungs have different roles, and if they confuse their roles, we die. If they're not distinct from each other in the way they contribute to and receive from the rest of the system, we die. Same with this. So the men and the women have different roles. So Grandpa, one example, if I may, and I don't know whether we talked about this last time we had a filmed interview, but the LA riots were going on. This was the early 90s. And I said to Grandpa, who taught me one-on-one, I've been privileged to get one-on-one teaching from wisdom keepers from cultures, indigenous cultures all over the world for decades. And I don't know how the heck that happened, but, you know, it's a privilege beyond anything I've ever got, which I also got from academia and from business gurus and many others too. I get learning from everywhere and everybody. I said, what about these LA riots, Grandpa? And he's like, yeah, okay, well, what it is, you know, I think, Robert, the black people in Los Angeles are really angry. I mean, we've just had it again with, you know, Black Lives Matter being triggered in the way it was. A very similar thing happened, you know, decades later. But it had happened down there in LA back in the early 90s, and the riots were on, and they were turning cars over and setting fire to shops and looting, and, you know, but what it was was they'd had it with all this racist stuff that was going on. And the young men in particular, the adolescent men, were responding with violence and destruction, just like I was smashing up trains when I was 10, because I was angry and confused about stuff that was going on in my life. And I took it out on the poor old trains. But then the transport police arrested me and I got a free private education. All the rest is mystery. So I said, Grandpa, what do we do? You know, you're angry young black guys, adolescent black guys. He said, so the blood and the hormones are coursing through their veins. They're getting sexually aware. They're getting confused. They don't know what to do with that. They form gangs and they look to their peers for guidance as to how to do life. Well, their peers don't know that much. They need to talk to their grandparents, not their contemporaries. When we were having that period of adolescent confusion, one of the numerous rites of passage procedures that each human goes through, we were sent to the oldest people in the community and we lived with them, we chopped wood, we carried water, we fixed the roof, we grew the food, and we stayed with them for several years. And during that period, of course, we learned. And then by the time we came through that, we were out of the hormonal craziness time and we'd acquired skills. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And I kind of didn't really realize quite how profound it was. And I was driving down the 101 freeway later that day, and I really nearly went off the road. I was suddenly like, oh my flippin' goddess, as he would say. The families took the mothers' names as well as the land belonged to the women for the Chumash people. That solves the youth crime problem. That solves the youth income problem. That solves the youth drug abuse problem. That solves the youth gang problem. And it also solves the elder care problem because the young, strong males in this case are doing a lot of the work to take care of them and fix the roof and grow the food and carry the heavy water buckets. But by the time they've concluded that, they're proven providers and they're just about to become dads. And they can produce food and fix the roof and provide a warm, safe home for little tiny, the other most vulnerable people in the community, the newborn babies that they've just produced as fathers. And then the equivalent things happening with the women in the roundhouse while the men in the longhouse are doing this stuff. And I hope that answers your question in some way, but that to me taught me an enormous amount about if you want to know how to make the most people happy, mutually supportive, productive, safe, prosperous, go to the places where they've been doing it for thousands of years, trialing and erroring systems. That's why my new book's called Algorithmics. An algorithm is an if A then B piece of code, an algorithm with an I, and you can use them to get you into algorithms with a Y. This stuff, drumming this stuff, which the Gambian drum shamans taught me how to do as well. Because, they've trialed and errored the systems. They've built social algorithms, ecological algorithms that, enable people to do all that stuff without hurting each other, without hurting other innocent bystanders like frogs and ferns. And then we don't get the ecological and social damage done and everybody's happier. Does that make sense? It's gone quiet.
Yes. Nim, do you have any more questions?
No, but I think I could try and round up for the audience a few of these pieces. So
poor people.
No.
Listening to Rob rambling.
Well, it's just a few key takeaways that I actually got from what you were saying. So when we talk about building climate hubs, we want to keep them intergenerational. So we want it to be accessible and inclusive to all people. One of the things I definitely picked up was, if you're in the university context, there's also things that you can educate outwards as opposed to looking to create a club where you learn inwards. So it's like, what's going on in your university that you could potentially amplify within the community. And that doesn't obviously have to just be like growing food. It could be anything. It could be litter picking. It could be campaigning. There's so many actions you can take. And then one of the things I definitely took away from what you said was also ensuring that when you're looking at making them inclusive, you're crafting them in such a way that there's something for each person to come and take so that it feels like you're getting more and more people through the door because they feel there's something in it for all of them. And I think I'd reflect on that to say, climate change it has something for all of us. So in that respect, I think, for any of you who are thinking of doing that, you don't need to have a particular reason. It's just, I think, more the ability to draw those people in and take it from there. So I think that was really powerful. And yeah, I mean, it's just been such a pleasure to have you. I think one question I also did have was, you've had this very vast and varied career across the whole sustainability space. You've looked at it from bottom up and top down. And for a young person right now, obviously this context is very different. There's so many things that have changed that for someone who said to you, for example, Rob, I want to do something in sustainability, what would you say to them? How could they navigate this?
You guys ask the best questions. I mean, I make an awful fumble of answering them sometimes, but the questions are great. In Dreamwalker, she was the first shaman I worked with. She was a Navajo Irish shaman with a PhD in psychology too, so she really knew how people tick. And she said to me early on, I was called shadow player in those days. That was my medicine name in those days. She said, shadow player, you need to learn not to ask, not to seek answers, but to stalk the best questions. And you guys do that so well. Taught me a lot, that one. I got one-on-one with her too. I worked with her for 5 years. She only teaches women now. But as you can see, I'm kind of a woman, so I get away with it. I would say the key thing to answer your question is, which is a great one, good stalking, in the good sense of the word. There's top down and there's bottom up. And there's two forms of top down, right? There's greenwash and there's enlightened self-interest. My great buddy and one of the alumni of the program I was able to help to trigger at Bath University when they asked me to help get bums on seats for the Masters in Responsibility and Business Practice in the 90s. And a guy that did that program was Kene Umeyasiegbu, and he's one of the leading lights in Tesco's sustainability program. And he's focused on enlightened self-interest in the top down, right? So you can join a company like that and do what Kene is doing and do something really cool. Greenwash, the unenlightened, if I may make so bold as to be dualistic for a moment, is now becoming illegal because, there's the Green Claims Code and it's soon going to be actually illegal. People will be prosecuted for making mendacious claims about their so-called green credentials. The bottom-up thing, so that's one way you can go. You can join Kene and his team at Tesco or many others in the various other places where genuine good work is being done in enlightened self-interest, gaining market share by being part of the solution, as also Sainsbury's were with our first farmers market and so on. But then there's bottom up. And the reason why, for me, bottom up is there's two kinds of bottom up as well. And the two kinds of bottom up are fighting against things, and we need people to do that. Greta's incredible. And she's doing a great job of saying, stop, you are killing us. Do not do that stuff. And then there's saying no to what you don't want is only half the answer. The other half is saying yes to what you do want. And I would say that, campaigning against things I call activism, campaigning for things I call action. And I tend to be more focused on what we want to say yes to. So co-creating a community climate club is a great way to say, so what do we want? We want income, we want security of energy, we want not to have to pay quadruple for diesel fuel to drive our cars. We'd rather just have Teslas, but they're not cheap. How can we be part of the solution by creating a means to do transport, to do food, to do furniture, to do fashion, to do housing, to do energy, to do finance, in a way whereby we are rewarded financially, but also ecologically and socially by being part of the solution, by making it more prosperous to be part of the solution, by driving the agenda that says we want to say yes to social justice, not no to social injustice. Those super cool people at XR and Greta's tribe, Extinction Rebellion do fantastic work at saying stop, enough, that's no longer acceptable. And the Green Claims Code and other legislation is doing the same thing. But what do you want to say yes to is the question I would want to ask everybody. And if you get together with a group of people like we did around that kitchen table in the 1980s and forming the first community climate club, effectively through Bath Permaculture Trust, was like, what do we want to say yes to? We want safety for the kids on the streets. We want income and nutrition and health benefits for the people that are struggling to achieve that. We want the chance for everybody to prosper by being part of the solution. That's something I can say yes to.
Love that.
Yeah, no, and I completely echo that, because there's even something in you say about how we psychologically frame solutions in our mind when we come from that, what do I want versus what I don't want? Because you are right, there are, I like the way you frame the different elements of how you can get involved from a top down or bottom up, and then are you for activism or are you for action? And I think you can be both. I think sometimes people can be both, but yeah, and that's what I was coming to, that there are people who do both and do it very well. But then I'm just kind of echoing one of the speakers we had earlier today, who also talked about, the sheer burnout you feel from having to be one or the other. And so how you can allow yourself to be dualistic and allow yourself to be actually in between both of those places, and almost do the activism for certain things, do action for certain things. You just got to pick and choose where you start from. But one final question I had was, when you kind of look, you touched on policy and things like that. When you look at where we're going from a policy framework as a world, do you feel that there's a lot of work to do in those policy rooms, or do you feel that more of the work is to be done in the communities, or is there a clean balance of both?
Well, okay, so funnily enough, I'm quoted in of all places, not wishing to be judgmental here, I never expected that to be the place that would want to promulgate my sort of thinking. The Sunday Express quotes me yesterday. I know, I'm surprised too. But hey, bless them. I don't want to get judgmental here, but I have a line that I really like, which is, really stinky manure can grow some very fragrant roses. But don't quote me, will you? Don't let any audience people hear that.
Yeah.
Whoops, too late. So they quote me on government policy as regards the retrofitting of existing housing stock. We have 20-something million, somewhere between 20 and 25 million existing houses that need to be retrofitted. And the policy that's being jettisoned, and I'm actually, funnily enough, there's a group of, I think, mainly Tory MPs that are advocating a better way forward, and they're pretty close to they've got quite a lot of the right thinking going on. These people aren't stupid; they just have a different worldview, and I think it's a little bit past its sell-by date, if I may make so bold as to suggest such a thing. Don't want to be controversial now, but it's about all win, not me win, you lose.
Yeah.
Wish to see more all win. That's how organisms work. There's no waste in a forest. All waste is unused output, and only humans create it, as you know. So if we do that in human cultures, it'd be kind of efficient, not to mention fun and healthy and prosperous. So basically I said, look, what you probably need to do is something like work UK government with a big financial institution, because they're not villains, they're potentially part of the solution, and create for homeowners, you would give people who aren't homeowners and don't have income at this point opportunities to create income through becoming part of the sort of thing we're talking about, learning skills from which to prosper and being part of the solution. But in the meantime, they can get grants. But everybody else who has the privilege of being, say, a homeowner, for instance, but can't afford the rapidly hiking fuel bills, can maybe get a loan extension deal in a partnership between government and a bank or a building society. And 25,000 to retrofit your house is a lot of money, but if you borrow it, it's 100 a month. It's actually probably less. You're going to make the savings of that and more from having done the retrofit, from cutting your fuel bills. So if you can have a holiday while the retrofit's being done, and then start paying the 100 a month or less, or whatever it may be, for that 25,000 mortgage extension, you can fund it from the fuel savings, and the world's a better place. You've got a more valuable home. Your children and grandchildren have a better chance of thriving. Everybody, the government gets the kudos and get re-elected. Everybody wins. It's all win, like all good, healthy organisms, all supporting and being supported by each other. But Sorry, I'm probably going off on another blimmin' ramble again here. So that's for me, that's the policy thing. I think, again, what I would say is we are, as a culture, and this is policy on a global scale, needs to be looking into this one and acting on this one. And in some places, it's beginning to. Gregory Bates, it's an epistemological problem we face, actually. We are addicted, I would suggest, if I can go a bit academic for a moment, we're addicted to, just like an alcoholic is addicted to alcohol, we as a culture are addicted to economic growth fueled by mostly burning fossil fuels. And just like the alcohol who's burning ethanol in their system to ease the pain they feel and the fear they feel, it's going to kill you. The problem the alcoholic has, as Gregory Bateson, the great systems theorist, whom I adore, in a magnificent essay in his book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. Again, I have the PDF, I can send it to anybody who wants it. He says, for the alcoholic, the double bind, as he calls it, is life is hell if I drink, life is hell if I don't drink. You remember? We've talked about this, I think. Now, for our culture, on a global scale, human culture, we're terrified because life is hell if we collapse the economy by not driving economic growth. But life is hell if we don't collapse the economy because economic growth itself is going to kill us, especially if it's driven by burning fossil fuels, which it predominantly has been for the last however long. For the alcoholic, says Bateson, there's no way out of life is hell if I drink, life is hell if I don't drink. You're going to die, actually, ultimately. You feel like you're going to die. You'll die, you feel like, if you lose your solace, the reassurance and the easing of fear that alcohol gives you, or crack cocaine, or shopping, or sex, or control, or work, whatever it is. But of course, if you just carry on with that addiction, you'll die from that. And not only substance abuse kills you. So he said you need to transcend the double bind. And the only reason Alcoholics Anonymous is so successful at dealing with addiction is because in Alcoholics Anonymous, they suggest that you take on board the idea of a higher power of your understanding. For me, that's life with a capital L. So I'm part of life. In exactly the same way as the little cell in my forearm doesn't understand when I pick up my water bottle that I need to hydrate a little bit. And to do that, I need to use the other arm and the cells in that arm to undo the cap and drink the water. That little cell doesn't understand my intent, but is necessary to achieve it. In the same way, I don't understand the intent of the intelligence, which is life itself, but I'm necessary as part of life to whatever the purpose of life herself or himself or itself may be. So if I abandon this fear-driven need to control everything or ease the pain of not being able to with alcohol or crack cocaine or shopping, or burning fossil fuel as a culture, then I can break out of the double bind. And what alcoholics will tell you, as Bateson says in the essay, by the way, within that book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind, is called The Cybernetics of Self. The alcoholic will tell you all the things I sought from alcohol when I became sober by surrendering my will and my life to a higher power of my understanding, life, God, the universe, this flying spaghetti monster, doesn't matter what it is in your mind. If you make that epistemological shift, you not only are freed from the double bind and the life-threatening impossibility of that catch-22, but suddenly you get all the things you wanted from alcohol. So you get that sense of reassurance, that sense of ease and peace, that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself, which for some people is a religious experience, and for some people it's just, systems theory writ large, because, I'm part of a very big system called all of creation, which feels cool. So that's why I only drink water nowadays. It's a giveaway.
Well, Rob, thank you so much. Wendy, any closing remarks from yourself?
No, I've posted the link to Rob's article in the chat. If anyone would like a copy of Rob's book, it is a really fantastic read. So just drop us a message and we can ensure that you get that email to you on PDF. But yeah, thank you so much, Rob. Yeah, I know you kind of like to go off on a few different tangents, but you know, you've got 30 years of experience, and all of it is, you know, so beneficial to the conversation that we're trying to have over these 3 days. So thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today.
Always a pleasure.
So much.
Lovely.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone.